So across Europe, we have the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulations, which the UK still have to adhere to, at least for 2018. And then, of course, to be able to allow data to freely flow from the UK to Europe, and likewise from Europe back the way, they really had to come up with data regulations which matched, and of course in this case sometimes supersede the existing data regulations again. So of course it's to be welcome, because of course our data is becoming so important now, and companies have so much control over it. They do so much processing on it, and of course the public generally have no idea how it's being used, where it's being used, who it's being sold to. So it is really incumbent upon the government to enforce legislation which really makes the onus on the companies who hold our data to be responsible with that data, because it really identifies us, and it can lead to horrific losses for an individual, for an organization. So I really welcome legislation which comes along and forces companies to be just more responsible with data. Currently, you can write to a company, you can email a company and ask to get a copy of the information that they hold on you. Sometimes it's not that easy, and again, this legislation, of course, is trying to make it more easy for individuals to contact organizations to request the information that they hold on them, and companies will have to respond in a faster manner and, of course, face large fines if they fail to do so. So again, it's just forcing companies to play ball more, so to add more resources, because in the past companies have just some social media companies have only had a handful of people responding to inquiries, and of course they're able to say, look, we just can't cope. But those excuses will not hold water in the future, that companies will have to be seen to be given the adequate resources to respond to public inquiries about the data that is held upon them. And it's just fair, if a company has data belong to me, I'd like to know if it's correct and what they have on me. That's just, a lot. All of these really, very few things here, even geeks who generally do not welcome regulations at all. Regulations often lead to restrictions. We find when governments interfere quite a lot that it's very restrictive, like the silly cookie law, where every time you go to a website, up pops a warning, which was really a bad way of enforcing a law about cookies, because it just affects all of us when we're surfing. But in this case, the regulations, very few people who know about computers, know about security, know about the internet, would argue with these regulations, really. Even with GDPR or the larger EU regulations, and of course what I'm seeing about these new ones which supersede, again, allowing, especially again, who among us would argue with allowing people to remove information held by social media sites like Facebook up until the age of 18. In other words, now you can ask for any data on a young person to be deleted. And of course that's to be welcomed. I mean, who would argue with that? The only people who lose there are the social media sites who want to get as much information as they can in individuals. But we know that young people and even older people do stupid things at times on social media, but especially younger people should be given the right to delete information on them held by the social media companies. If you email any organization and say, are you taking precautions with our data, the correct precautions, they'll always come back with a pat answer. Of course they'll say that they are. It's only when they've been hacked that they realize that we can look back and see that some of these companies were completely stupid with the way they handle the data. But in other words, again, just the public to be aware that, yes, they can ask companies for the data, that they can also, that they shouldn't, in the future, we should not be able to be forced into email distribution lists or phone call lists because the box is automatically ticked for us. Companies now have to allow us, or they cannot have pre-ticked boxes for us to be opted into emailing lists and phone lists. In other words, if the public are aware of that, they can bring the attention of the information commissioner. Again, when you're going for instance, you're going for insurance in the future, or you're going to get a credit card check or whatever else, you can't be refused credit cards or insurance where the processing was done by a machine algorithm. In other words, we have the right to expect that humans looked at the application that we put in and that it was a human who denied our claim. In other words, we can't. So therefore, there's organizations like insurance companies who really have to change the way they do things when it comes to processing applications online. Again, we can also expect that we can move our data from one cloud provider to the other. So if you find in the future that that you can't really move your data from, say, a Google service to an Amazon service, for instance, then you have the right to be able to email them and to, actually, take legal action, because companies have to adhere to them. So I guess in some ways it's up to individuals to kind of read even the higher level abstracts of these new regulations which have been brought in and know what they can expect. And then, armed with that information, then being able to take, the correct legal action against these larger organizations.